Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 9, verse 18 through 28. And we're continuing our study of Genesis. And then I have kind of a note at the top of the Bible study that says chapter 10 can be read for reference. And this is the descendants of Noah. We're really trying to focus in our study on the stories of Genesis and kind of the characters. There is, I think, value, and of course, God put it there for a reason in the timelines and family trees and genetics and things like that that's available to us in the book of Genesis. However, sometimes it doesn't make for a good Bible study in terms of this being our primary place where we're trying to find meaning, and sometimes it makes for our reading to be very long. So Genesis 10 is called the Table of Nations by many, and it kind of helps us understand where the nations came from that are descended from Noah, which is really everybody in the world at that time. And so we will go through that just a little bit. But we're not going to, I don't think we need to read through chapter 10 as we're studying this. So the text for today says, the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. That is going to become familiar to us because it's said multiple times in this text. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, again, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be a slave of Japheth." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years. Um, and then he died. And then the beginning of the chapter 10 says, "This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood." And then we have the accounts of their children. So remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. Some of our Bible studies have so many questions, I have to make the print smaller and things like this. This particular Bible study, I was able to fit a map in at the bottom, and so hopefully we'll be able to do this in a timely fashion. Um, there is some good truth here and some good thoughts, um, but maybe we can spend more time in discussion than answering questions. So, number one says, what happened in last week's Bible study? So, remember, we've been doing this, kind of trying to kind of remember what we've been talking about. And we've been talking for 2 weeks about the flood and about Noah. And so, the first week was about, what was going on prior to the flood, the righteousness of Noah and him building the ark and loading onto the ark. Then last week was God's faithfulness and remembering Noah and their exit from the ark and the dry land showing up again and the um, commitment that God made not to destroy any longer the people of the earth and the whole earth by flood, the sign of the covenant, the rainbow, and so we kind of ended there. So now they're off the ark, and this is what's going to happen today. Number two says, what do we learn in 9:18? So this is the beginning of our text. It says, and we have some fill in the blank. A, the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, let me just say that um, well, let's just continue. So B says Ham was the father of Canaan, and I put that in there when I read the text. I said this several times. This is something that just keeps coming up. It's something that is um, seems to be very prominent and important to the folks, whoever it was, whether it be Moses or otherwise, that wrote down, that recorded all of this. So, historically, traditionally, we believe that we've talked about this, that Moses wrote the the first five books of the Bible, and we talked about this in the introduction. We read this. We discussed that it was probably written down as sort of, this is your guideline, this is our history, this is the work of God amongst the people of God as they were going into the promised land, that Moses knew he wasn't going to be able to accompany them into the promised land, so he recorded everything that was the interaction of God and his people, and he gave it to them so that they would have that moving forward. And so, given that, then we know that if that is the case, um, then it seems reasonable and significant that it would be an important thing for them to remember that this is the point when Ham, the father of Canaan, was cursed. This is the point when Canaan was cursed. And that's important because Israel is about to take the land of Canaan. And in fact, historically, well, maybe I'm giving away some things, but Abram and his family lived in the land of Canaan. The people of God, the Semites, the descendants of Shem, particularly the line of Abraham, continually came back to Canaan throughout the book of Genesis. But we're never. But then obviously we're in Egypt in slavery for a time, and when they came out, God gave them the land of Canaan. And when we studied Exodus or Numbers, or even studied First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, and talked about the interactions of God's people with the Canaanites, there was often a feeling of how unfair it seemed to be that God sided with the Israelites and took away the land of the Canaanites, and that God seems to be commanding them to wipe the Canaanites out entirely from the land, or else they're going to fall into the worship of other gods that the Canaanites practiced. And there's all of this, and I think that this is a huge, important thing in biblical history that helps us understand why this is happening, and helps us. Maybe we still won't think it's fair, perhaps, but it helps us realize that this was not in a vacuum. This wasn't just randomly God picked the Canaanites to pick on, and he picked the Israelites to care for, but that actually the behavior of their fathers at some point had brought upon them a curse. And now then we have this discussion of generational curses. And let me just say that from a New Testament perspective, in the Old Testament, sometimes the perception of generational curses is that one person is sinful and other people, their children are righteous and innocent and didn't do anything, but somehow this generational curse falls on these innocent, righteous people. But that's not really what generational curses are. In fact, when they were saying that sort of thing in the time of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and then the saying was, the parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So this prophecy was that the parents are eating these grapes and the children are suffering for it. Um, and God clarifies in that day, no, that's not the way it is. But the person who sins is the person that will be punished. But here's the truth about generational curses is the generational curses aren't about children being righteous and innocent and somehow suffering for the sin of their parents. It's the fact that when we are parents and we allow sin in our lives, it is passed down generation to generation. And even in our sort of our modern psychology and sociology, we recognize that many sort of abusive habits. We recognize that substance abuse is often passed down. Now, there's some kids that react so strongly against their parents' substance abuse that they would never touch the stuff. But many times, children that grow up in a household of substance abuse, and not only that, the emotional trauma and all the stuff that goes along with that, they end up also self medicating with similar substances or the same substances, and that's what they know. And so they follow in that footsteps. Physical abuse tends to, and I want to be clear, tends to, doesn't have to, we all have our own choices, but tends to follow in family lines, where if a parent was physically or verbally abusive, then children become physically and verbally abusive. Oftentimes because they're not taught any better ways to handle conflict and confrontation in relationship. So when we're talking about generational curses, I think this is an important concept because the issue when Israel, and I know I've like completely diverged from the Bible study, and honestly, I'm pretty much teaching the rest of the Bible study, so don't worry, we're not going to have to take extra time. The issue that happens in the book of Numbers, for instance, when and the book of Joshua, the issues in First and Second Kings and First and Second Samuel with the Canaanites is always that the Canaanites are ungodly people who follow other gods and will lead the people of God astray if they make peace with them, and so God commands that they be destroyed instead. But all of that starts here. All of that starts with this story and the sense of disrespect and dishonor that Ham has for his father. Now, we're going to talk about whether Noah should have been drunk and passed out anyway, and naked, but but that's a different thing. What we do see is between the brothers that Ham saw this, went and told his brothers. Almost, we have this sense that he's making fun of his dad, he's belittling his dad, he's spreading his dad's dishonor to his brothers, and he would, rather than fix the problem, rather than help, he is tearing down. Now, I just let me go down that path for a minute. When we see something wrong, when we see something that brings dishonor on a person, when we see sin in the life of a person, we have a choice how we're going to respond. We could be a gossip and go and spread that dishonor and let everybody know about what they just saw about this person. I mean, never mind that it's his dad, but with anybody, we have that choice. Or we could go to the person in sin. We could go to the person that's experiencing dishonor. We can help them. We can fix the situation. And to be honest, in the New Testament, Jesus dealt with this about what you're supposed to do when you see somebody that's in sin. We should be helping them. We should not be judging in such a way that we say, oh, that's wrong. Now I'm going to go tell everybody else about the wrong thing that they did. But rather, we should be going to them and addressing sin in them. We have Matthew 18 that talks about how to address a brother that sins against us. We have Matthew 7 that talks about first remove the plank from your own eye so that you can see clearly, to help your brother remove the speck from his eye. And so we have instructions about what we're to do when somebody is in dishonor, when somebody is in sin, and it is not, let's go laugh at them and tell everybody else. And so, lest you think, I know there was a part of me that saw this, and I've got two boys at home, and boys will be boys, and boys. There's nothing funnier than poop and nakedness to boys, and so part of me said, "Oh boy, if his entire family line got cursed for that, I think there's a lot of us boys that are in trouble." Um, but let me just say that I think this is bigger than boys giggling about poop and nakedness. The big thing is the intent to dishonor his father that came here. Let me get back to the Bible study. Number 3 says, where have we heard the name Canaan before? And I've already answered this. Canaan is the land and the people that were in the land. The lands were named for the people. The people were named for the father that they were descended from. And so the Canaanites were split up in different groups and were called by their fathers' names that were sons of Canaan. And so we find them in the promised land when Israel entered in. It's interesting to go and do a search of biblical texts dealing with Canaan and seeing how many times Abram and others, even in the book of Genesis, in this family line ended up living in the land of Canaan prior to um, the that story when they go into the promised land. But that's where we've heard the name Canaan before. It's prominent in Scripture, in Old Testament Scripture, and it is ultimately the land of Israel. It becomes the land of Israel. Number 4, what happens in the story in 9:20 through 23? A. Noah planted a vineyard. B. Noah drank some of the wine from the vineyard and became drunk. C. Noah lay uncovered in his tent. I've really already told this story. D. Ham, the father of Canaan, again, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers. E. Shem and Japheth, and this is the difference in how they handled it, took a garment and laid it across their shoulders and walked backward to cover their father's naked body. This is how they handled what they were told of what was happening. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father naked. And it's not a matter of, you could argue that Canaan saw his father naked accidentally, perhaps initially, whereas they had a warning. So I don't think it's whether or not they saw him naked, so much as how they responded to his nakedness that they knew was present, versus how he responded when he was aware that his father was passed out naked. Um, And we've already talked about that. Number 5, what happened when when Noah, who was naked, woke up, according to verses 24 and 25. So it says, when Noah awoke from his wine, and found out what his youngest had done to him, he said, cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers. So let me just lay this out. It wasn't God who initially cursed Canaan, um, but rather, um, but rather it was Noah, the father of Ham, who not only cursed Ham but Canaan specifically. Um, and then he also said, "Praise be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." So Canaan is cursed by his father. And note that it's Canaan that's mentioned here, not Ham. And even though it was Ham that is the brother of Shem and Japheth. And so there's this significance of, of the connection with Canaan. And my personal thought is that's because at the time of this writing, if this was written down by Moses, this was written down to remind us why Canaan has its place in history, why God is instructing them to destroy Canaan entirely. Um, Remind us that Canaan does not serve God, whereas Shem and his descendants did. Um, and this is all important at the time of its writing. It's possible that Canaan was already born at the time of this, and therefore, at the time of Noah, at the time of them coming out of the ark, and therefore this is the firstborn of Ham, and therefore we know he's the one that's mentioned. Um, what did Noah say about Shem and Japheth in 26 and 27? I already just read this. And then number 7 says, how does this inform our studies of the rest of the Bible? And I've already kind of begun that process of telling you. I did include this little map. Um, so basically, what this shows is that Shem is the parent of Israel and and these areas in the Arabian Peninsula. We see Ham being the father of Cush and these others that are in North Africa. We know that at some point in the process, Moses has a wife who's a Cushite, and these are the Africans. And we know that Japheth settled north, and in this map shows them um, around in Europe and Russia and northern up in that direction. Um, Eastern Europe and all of that. So these are the directions that they all spread. And when we think of those people, then I think in my mind, one of the first things that comes to my mind is the difference in how those people tend to look, and that the descendants of Ham must have been of a darker complexion. The descendants of Japheth must have been a lighter complexion, and the descendants of Shem must have had sort of an olive skin. Um, this is how those peoples are known, at least today. Um, but we see Canaan with this little square around it, settling in what is now Israel. And ultimately, this is the land. And we have this little square that says the Arvadites, the Zemarites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Sidonianites, the Sidonians, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites. And that's just outside on the edge of Canaan. These are the people of Canaan. And so these are the ones that are going to show up in the conquest of Canaan. Um, so I think I know I taught this Bible study a little more out of order, perhaps, than normal, and maybe you will. Maybe if you're teaching this, you can get it all back in order. But I would just say a couple things. One, that we have one thought, and that is how do we deal with dishonor and what was the sin of Ham? In this Bible study, but also the impact that that sin had then ultimately on the entire family line. And we can see that with Canaan, but also I think we should apply that to our lives and consider that very carefully how our sin affects our family line.